Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. On behalf of everyone at Rev.io, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, audio will automatically come in through your computer speakers. However, if you're having trouble using your speakers or unhappy with the quality of the sound, you can also dial via phone number 415-930-5321 and enter access code 388-003-323. Next, a recorded version of this webinar will be emailed to you within 2 weeks and available for on-demand access from the Rev.io website. Lastly, we would like to make sure that all of our valued clients have registered for our Client Summit. This annual event is an opportunity for our clients to hear from industry leaders, network with similar organizations, and learn platform best practices and new enhancements. Space is limited, so please register now for this event. For those of you just joining us, welcome. Today, our platform team will be showcasing our REST API design and asking for your feedback. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's lead presenter, Ross Overstreet. Ross is the CTO and founder of Rev.io and has spent the last 15+ years working on the Rev.io platform. Most recently, he's led the organization as we integrate with new partners, build our suite of IoT-specific features, and developed new order entry functionality in Rev.io. I'll turn it over to Ross.
Hello, everyone. This is Ross Overstreet. Glad that you could join the presentation today. Looking forward to walking through, giving you some information about our new API that we have in development. That's been a long project for us, one that we are getting closer to completion on, and something we're excited to share with you and to get your feedback on. So first, little background on this. So we're developing V3 of our API. It's rebuilt from the ground up. Some big architectural changes in our platform in order to do this. Little history, our version 2 of our API, or V20, as a lot of people call it, was launched originally in 2011. We have some other APIs that date back, even much earlier than that, early 2000s. A handful that are still in use by a handful of clients today. Roughly 40% of our clients, if you just look at the total number and count each client, the same, use the API today. But with new clients, and we're definitely seeing, a bigger push for it. Roughly 85% of our new clients are heavily relying on it. Some are using Rev.io as a platform, operating heavily out of other systems such as Salesforce and internal systems. So all of our, typically our newer clients, part of their projects are heavy integrations, and relying heavily on the API. A lot of existing clients are doing that as well, spending time building deeper integrations. The API, we think, is extremely important. We always have thought it was very important, and it's been a little bit difficult with the architecture of our V2 API to expand it and to grow the way that we want it to. Since 2016 until now, so just looking at year over year, it's 200% growth. So it's It's basically 3x the amount of API traffic, number of users, number of API calls. So there's definitely a lot of interest in it and a lot of need for it. The new API that we're building is utilizing modern technologies, we think, and we think that it'll be much easier for everyone to use and will provide a lot more functionality. So I wanted to start and just talk a little bit about our goals on this, because when we started this project initially, so my team spent the first half of this year focused on this heavily in design and additional proof of concepts development, making preparations for it in our code base. We started this originally kind of as an R&D project early last year, so early 2016. We had a working model. We had a proof of concept that had quite a bit of functionality, but it was more to explore how we might do this, what type of architectural changes were needed, etc. And in doing this, we started off with three simple goals. The first was to improve the developer experience. So when we think about using our API, we think about the developers that are using it, that are writing code against it to solve problems, to integrate systems, also to maintain integrations to Rev.io. There's a lot of moving parts anytime you have APIs connecting systems together, and so thinking about how easy is it to build, how easy is it to maintain, to troubleshoot, to explore, etc. So we wanted there to be lower barriers to entry, make it easier to start. We wanted integrations to be faster and require less reading of documentation, less finding gotchas in the documentation as you go, make it more intuitive. You could explore it easily. We wanted it to be easier to maintain, such that as we added new fields, new functionality, there was good backwards compatibility. Sometimes there's issues with that today, and certain API clients have trouble when we introduce a new field, things like that. And we were really looking for something that's standards-based. When we developed the API, the SOAP standard that we were using, I guess we could use standard kind of as a loose term, because .NET platforms versus Java platforms versus do-it-yourself, depends on the framework you're using. Everyone's SOAP is different, and we've integrated with a lot of systems ourselves and a lot of carriers and a lot of SOAP platforms, and they're all painful in different ways and have their own gotchas and limitations, and so we wanted it to be a great developer experience for anyone using our API. API first architecture, it's a buzzword you hear, and we've been in business almost 15 years at this point, so couldn't really say that we started with the API and built everything on top of it. But what this means to us is that we are using this API, so we're building it, the architecture internally, such that everything is built on top of this going forward. And it's a process that takes time and will evolve, but any of our new UI development is being built on the API, using the API. So we will be heavy users of this project, and probably one of the we'll probably be the company that uses our API the most, which ensures that we're going to have a better product in the end. We are users of it on a daily basis. Then we have more insight, more empathy, and able to see the problems and needs and opportunities better than today. So we use the V2 API very minimally here today, and for the most part it's only for our outside clients and vendors to use. This also gives us the ability to have testing and documentation built in, because it's a core part of our product. All of our business rules are centralized in one place in this API. that our front end uses, that our our recurring back end services use, that our customer portal, any of our development will use this same platform. So you no longer have to worry about the UI having a different business rule than the API, etc. And then because we are exposing more new functionality will be available as we build it, and I'll talk a little bit about that on this next goal. The third goal is to give you direct access to the underlying platform. The way the API works today is there's really a vast system underneath it, underneath all of our from our UI and agent portal to API. They're all accessing a much larger system underneath. And with the V2 API, as we want to give access, let's say to contacts through the API, we have to build specific functions to do that. We have to think through the use cases of how will someone search for contacts? Are they going to search by customer or by agent? Are they going to be searching by email address or telephone number or name or a custom field, or did we take that into consideration? We have to make all those decisions today whenever we are building a contacts API, and it's a lot of work, and it's also hard to predict every way that someone may want to interact with customers, payments, contacts, bills, orders, etc. And so what we wanted to do is to just open up direct access to our underlying platform. Instead of thinking through, what's the use case that someone's going to be thinking of whenever they're integrating with our system, we wanted to provide more of just open access of here's the whole platform. You can do more with our API than you can with our front end, and so enable people to do more with our API instead of less. And that's a different approach than we've taken in the past, and something we think that will make a huge difference as we go forward. So understanding those three goals and looking into the projects, there were some design decisions that we had to make. One was we wanted it to be easy to test and to discover resources. We wanted today with the SOAP API, it's a little bit difficult to do because you can't interact with the API using your browser too easily. So you spend a lot of time reading documentation, trying to understand how the different pieces fit together. We wanted to support different authentication methods such as OAuth 2.0. There's quite a bit that OAuth offers, but it makes it difficult for exploring the API with the browser. So we're also supporting basic authentication as well, so that using your browser you can go to a URL and see the result of looking up a customer and enter a username and password to see the result of the API call there instead of having to do something more complex. So we wanted it to be easy to interact with. There's a lot built into HTTP that we wanted to use as well. So we spent a lot of time researching standard response codes, headers, methods. There's a lot that that are commonly used. So we're looking at the spec, but then we're also looking at what does Stripe use, what does Twitter use, what does Twilio, what do PayPal. Look at frequently used APIs and try to learn from what they've done. Also in HTTP, there's some built-in opportunities, for performance boosts, for caching certain times, and really just using HTTP for what it is to provide a uniform way to interact with our API instead of rolling our own. So some of the ideas that we've found from other APIs. We've looked at how companies do paging for large result sets, filtering, sorting, item potency, and just everything we could find from others. Big question, has been REST for SOAP, and what's the advantage of one versus the other. And I'll show this here more in a minute, but our current API is a SOAP API. SOAP is a well-defined contract that you publish, and an API consumer can interact with it based on these strong contracts that are defined in the SOAP spec that we provide. It uses makes heavy use of XML headers. The documents are very complex. If you've ever tried to construct a SOAP XML request or read a response, manually, you know how difficult and painful it is. And with all the integrations that we've done to SOAP APIs, we've had to, there are some times where we've had to, kind of hand construct requests and, hand parse responses to get them to work at times. And it's very difficult to do. And even though SOAP is a standard, everyone works differently. So our new API is a REST API, and that's kind of the different points I've talked about so far are much easier with a REST API. We the performance gains, scalability, and just the easier for you to work and explore the data that you have in Rev.io are big goals. So having a consistent method for accessing the API makes it where you don't have to rely on documentation as much, although the documentation will be there and will be improved. It's more intuitive and gives you the ability to do more with just based on intuition and not having to read a lot of complicated documents. So quick example, this is looking at our current API, and I know it's code and it's a little hard to read, but just want to show an example of, let's say that you are trying to look up a contact in Rev.io using the V2 API. So there's a method called contacts query, and the current API allows you to look up a contact either by the ID of that specific contact or by a customer. So if you put in a customer ID, you might get multiple contacts back because one of your customers could have 5 contacts on it. If you put in a specific contact ID, you'll get just that one back. So this is an example of the command line that you would use to call this. You would have to have this XML file saved or otherwise piped into this command. You can see here where there's a lot of structure to this when really you're just trying to say, give me contact ID 2169. So that's your request. The response that comes back, couldn't really fit it here on this screen, but you can see the response starting over here on the left and how many headers and how complex this is. So it's returning a contact. You basically get the ID, the customer's ID, the name. That's pretty much all that was available. So all of this data was returned just to say, the contact's name is Alexa Sims. So it's very verbose. If you have a framework that parses it, like a good Java or .NET framework that does this stuff for you, it makes it easy. You don't have to deal with the complexity. But when it doesn't work right at the beginning or when something breaks, it's a pain to debug and troubleshoot. So looking at what this would look like with a REST API, essentially it's a simplified URL. So it's everything starts with this part. So it's contacts 1, 2, 3, 4, and you pass in user, client code, and password. And this is what the response would look like. So there are no unnecessary headers. You're not seeing a lot of extraneous data that's unnecessary. You could actually go to this is not live, but you could go to this URL in your browser. It would prompt you for a username and password. You could put in your username and password, and you could see the response. So it makes it really easy to troubleshoot, debug, and explore. The current API, you don't really have a way of doing that. You have to use a specialized tool to interact with it. So this would work in a similar way if you wanted to look up a customer. Instead of contacts here, you'd put in customers and then the customer ID. With the previous API, we also had, if you'll recall, I think I said you could look up a contact by the ID or the customer ID. But what if you want to search by name or email? Well, with the V2 API, we would have to build specific API functions for that. We'd have to think about that ahead of time and do it. And the new API, the way we're building it, is that you could search by any of the fields that are related to a contact. So you could search by name easily. And here's an example of that. Instead of putting the 1, 2, 3, 4, you could simply search for name equals Alexa Sims, and you're going to get the same response back. So it makes it instead of us having to think through each of these ahead of time, what are they going to want to search for? What parameters? How should we set it up? And potentially break your API integration if we add it later. It's just kind of built into this framework from the beginning so that you can interact with any of this stuff in an easy way. The kind of going back to the design, so we looked at SOAP versus REST. So we've defined resources, and a resource is something that like a report is a resource, a note, a contact, a customer, a user in Rev.io, an agent, a payment, a bill, a ticket, a task. Those are all defined as resources. And so just as in that example, you could go to contacts 1, 2, 3, 4. You could do the same and go to tickets 1, 2, 3, 4 and get back all the information for that specific ticket. We are supporting from the beginning when we launched this the ability to look up, and so that can return a single ticket or task or note, or it can return multiple. If it returns multiple, it's going to be paged. You can sort it, etc. The ability to create a note or a contact ticket. The ability to update the entire resource, like update this contact, here are all the new fields, the customer's name, phone number, etc., as well as partial update. And that's something that I'm really excited about, where typically in APIs we've had to decide, if we allow you to update a customer, if we build the ability to do that, which fields can be updated. Whenever you send the update, if you left a field blank, did you mean to erase the email address on that contact, or were you just skipping that field? Did you intend to what were you intending with your update? And with a REST API and this design, it gives us the ability to say, a partial update can happen. So you can say, I want to update this customer and just change their bill profile ID and nothing else. Leave everything else the way it is. It's a really small request that your app would send to us. It would be easy to understand and process, and much more efficient than having to send over an entire customer and for us to compare and figure out what were they trying to update through that. Finally, delete is the last command there, the last operation that'll be offered. won't be available for everything. Certain things like a bill profile, if it's already linked to 10,000 customers and you try to delete it, it would not be allowed, but you could do an update or partial update and change the status to inactive. And so delete will be probably the least supported out of these because of the relationships that exist, but we plan to support these across all of the resources. All of the resources will work the same as far as authorization. So we're using our existing permission system built into Rev.io. We're going to do some work to reorganize that a little better, but we're going to use built-in permissions. So your API user, you can have the same fine-grained control over should they be able to, reverse a payment, should they be able to view what we're charging this customer, should they, an agent using the API, could they access information about this customer that's not associated with them, etc. So all of that will be, the same. There are a few things that we are still considering and don't have a clear answer on if we're doing this from the initial launch or not. Something that if any of these are important to you, give us that feedback, tell us more about it, and any ideas you have around them as well. One is the ability to, let's say you look up a customer and we return 50 fields from the balance, the status, the cycle date, the bill profile, the email address, etc. And maybe you only need a couple of fields. Maybe you need the customer's name, balance, and email address. So a sparse field set would be the ability to say, here are the 3 fields that I want back, and ignore all the other data. So there's some performance benefits both on our side and yours from doing that, because we're not transferring 50 fields that aren't needed. In a mobile environment, this is very important. You don't want to transfer these huge objects with 50 fields when you really need just a few pieces of data. So something we think is a great feature, but would like feedback if others would have a need for this and would find it important. Similar to that is what's referred to as object expansion. So if you look up a customer and it tells you that it's on bill profile ID 1000, maybe you also want the name of that bill profile, or is it a weekly, monthly, annual bill profile, etc. Object expansion would be the ability to say, hey, give me back this list of customers and also give me the name of each of their bill profiles, so I don't have to make a separate request to look those up. Or maybe a customer that was created by one of your team members. Whenever we return a customer, we're going to return the ID of that user, but maybe you want their name and their email address. So object expansion would be to being able to specify that in your request, that also give me back the person that created this customer's name and email, so I don't have to make a separate API call. Complex filtering is something we've spent quite a bit of time on researching. There are some options out there today, but it's instead of saying I want to look up payment ID 1000 or all the payments for this customer or all the payments by this user on this certain date, being able to say things like, I would like a list of all the payments created between June 1st and June 30th, 2017. So being able to have a date range, maybe saying greater than and between, like balances, you could say, give me all customers that had a balance greater than $300 or $10,000, or any customer who has a balance between $1 and $10, etc. So
being able to do that, there's not really a way built into REST and HTTP to do that, so everyone kind of rolls their own. There are some options that are out there, like OData is one that that's some APIs use. That's a bit messy, and we have some thoughts on it, but curious to see what who's interested in what. There's also roll your own and come up with your own way of defining greater than, less than, syntax for it, as well as something like GraphQL, where you could have more of a a more powerful query language to define resources and return the information that you need. So if there's anything in there that you think is would be good, then give us that feedback, and we'd definitely love to hear it. So here I'm going to do a quick walkthrough, just to so that you're familiar with the documentation that we've published. If you go to library.rev.io to our API documentation, there's a new section there, and here I'll show my screen. 1 second. Okay, so this is in Confluence. So this is in our public API docs. So this is the current API documentation we have out there. There's now a link that says the public design document for the V3 API is available. It also shows up here in the left. So you can go here and read it. We have it's a pretty long document. I think it's 40 plus pages. It talks in more detail about what I went over today, the goals behind it, as well as it talks about authentication, how that's being handled. It talks about specific HTTP status codes we're using, what those mean, etc. All the way down to listing resources that we have defined so far. So we talked about contacts. So here are the methods that we have planned. The ability to to get to look up contacts. It has examples of what those URLs would look like. Defines the fields that we plan to expose and how it can be used, etc. And you can see on customers, there's quite a lot that's been defined here, and I think that these are areas where we need feedback. Are there other fields that we didn't expose, or other resources that you think would be very important? Give us that feedback. We're trying to put everything here that we think that is used both by our development team and clients, and plan to as I said, we're planning to use this ourselves. So take a look at how this is organized, and what else you may need here, and we definitely would like your feedback. As far as the V2 SOAP API, there's no plans to retire it. I would say going forward, most of our investment is in the V3 API. Of course, we've spent a lot of time on it already. We're working to get something out later this year so that you can begin to use it. I think starting in 2018, and we've done this in the past, but we're going to have a little bit more discipline to it next year. We're going to periodically look at the V2 API, and we're going to see, are there API methods that no one has used, and a few months that seem to be dormant, that aren't needed any longer, and we'll send out an announcement and say, hey, no one seems to be using this anymore. going to retire it soon. And if anyone, is still using it or plans to use it, and maybe they're just not currently, then you can give us that feedback then. But we want as we can to retire old code. Helps us move faster in the future. I would say using both APIs together is okay. So if you have a big project built on V2 already, and as V3 becomes production ready, and there's some new functionality you want to take advantage of in that, or you're building onto it, you could use both together. It can be as you transition that your application support has parts of it that are V2 still, other parts that are V3. We would encourage that. You don't have to switch from one API to the other overnight, and expect that clients with existing integrations and vendors with existing integrations would probably be using a mix of that. Current state, the design document is public, so that's what I showed. We'll make sure everyone has a link to it. It's what I showed briefly there in our library.rev.io. We're asking for feedback. We have a Trello board started. We're using that now going forward. We're going to start to publish what we're working on in each sprint as far as the API goes. Also to have places for discussion on certain features like sparse field sets or object expansion. You have other ideas, put them there. We've gone through some of the Rev.io ideas. We've taken those and we've moved them over to this Trello board, and we want you to come here for information and to give us feedback, etc. Developments in progress. Availability, we expect to have a beta pretty soon, definitely Q4 of this year. Expect it to be iterative, so as we get something that's stable and solid, and we have a lot of the framework for that in place already, then we will release that, and we'll keep you updated as we add additional resources and functionality to it, and plan to continue development based on your feedback, and adjust our priorities on it as we go. So now I'd like to open it up for Q&A, and maybe I'll turn over to Olivia there, see if we have questions, and to do this. Thanks.
Thank you, Ross. That was hugely beneficial. And to our audience, please see the chat box in the webinar control panel for links to our API documentation as well as the Trello board. We look forward to hearing your feedback. So we have a few questions, Ross, and the first one is, when will it be available?
That's always the best question, right? And we've spent a lot of time on it at this point. We have it as an annual goal this year to release this fully functional based on the spec that's written and published there, the V3 API docs that's listed. So our goal is to have that fully functional and available by the end of the year, and we will hit that. We're considering doing, having a beta earlier with maybe some of the functionality, maybe not all of the resources, and would expect that sometime in Q4. It's something we're working on today. So just the next few months is when you'll start to see it and have access.
Great. The next question is, will there be a beta version generally available?
Yeah, so kind of along those same lines there. We expect to have a beta version before we have the full production release, and are targeting early fourth quarter of this year for that. So just in the next few months.
Okay, the next question is, how will Rev.io be using the API internally? So
we're using it a few different ways. for one, we're using it as a way to reorganize some of our existing code. So there's places where we have some business rules that exist in the main UI today in Rev.io, and some business rules that are in the current API. There's places where we have some code duplication, and we really needed a place to centralize all of this validation and security and logging, and so we're restructuring everything we do around this, and the API for us internally is the core library that we use to build everything that we build going forward. We're also looking towards a refresh to the main Rev.io user interface, and so a big push for the API and for the OAuth support was to be able to use the API as we rebuild the Rev.io front end. So as we update our look and feel and continue to modernize that, we are doing it based on the API and using the API exclusively for that.
Great. And we have time for a few more questions, but if we don't get to your question, we will be following up with you all via email to answer any question that you put in the question box. Just so keep the questions coming. The next question, Ross, is how will API keys be handled?
So as far as, I'm guessing that's around security, and so as far as security keys go, so there's two things. One is we're supporting basic authentication, so you can have a regular Rev.io username, password, you can use that to access the API. We recommend using OAuth, and there's a couple of different flows and ways of doing OAuth, but you can read more about that on our the V3 API docs that are published there, where we talk about the different flows and when you would use one OAuth method over the other, different use cases, but we have more details on that there and would encourage you to check that out.
Okay, and for our last question, if I still need to use a V2 API function that you plan to remove, can I ask you to keep it available?
For sure, and we've done this in the past where we've looked at an older API function. We have logging and kind of some telemetry on all of it, and we say, okay, no one has used this in 120 days, so we're going to give notice and we're going to retire it, and then someone just so happens that a week after you retire it, they pull out an old app that they built that was using it and they need it, and so we're going to try to do a better job of communicating and giving making it more visible to everyone, and if we say that, hey, we're retiring something and you need it, or you've planned to use it and maybe you're not, you've already invested some in it, tell us that, and we'll hold on to it for you. We're not retiring the V2 API, plan to support it going forward. Just if there's pieces of it that no one's going to use, we'd like to retire them, but by all means, yeah, give us that feedback and we'll hold on to it. We're not trying to make your lives any more difficult, trying to make things easier, and definitely want to support you in any way we can.
Great. That's all we have time for today, but if you've sent a question in through the question panel, we will be responding to each of your questions after the event. We'll follow up with you via email. In addition, we will be sending this full webinar recording to everyone that's registered for the event, but don't forget to provide any feedback on our API documentation on the Trello board. Thank you guys for joining us today, and we will see you next time.